welcome all to our session from Le Puy to Los Angeles, Justice in the CSJ Tradition here at the 2022 CSJ Center Symposium at Loyola Marymount University. My name is Michael McNaught, and I have the great pleasure of moderating our conversation this afternoon. Our time today concerns the works of two congregations of women religious whose story begins in 1650 Le Puy, France, and their acts of justice and service here in Los Angeles and the greater Southland. The Sisters of St. Joseph of Carondelet, Los Angeles Province, who began settling here in the 1880s, and the Sisters of St. Joseph of Orange, arriving here in the early 1900s. Though independent congregations, both are of the Worldwide Federation of Sisters of St. Joseph and embody the same shared charism. It is safe to say that there are very few communities in the Southland that have not been affected by one of these two congregations. Both have founded, sponsored, and continue to sponsor or support dozens of schools, hospitals, and a healthcare system, two major universities, as well as numerous social service organizations and pastoral centers. The spiritual, social, and economic impact of these two communities cannot be understated. And it certainly can be argued that some of the history of Los Angeles has been and will continue to be written by the CSJs and their colleagues. Today, we will unpack some of this tradition and charism and understand how it shapes works of justice here in the Southland. On a personal note, this conversation has special meaning to me as I have spent much of my professional career working with both of these congregations. As an employee of Loyola Marymount University, a sponsored ministry of the Sisters of St. Joseph of Orange, and as a trustee of St. Mary's Academy, founded and sponsored by the Sisters of St. Joseph of Carondelet. Our panel today on Zoom are some literal faces of justice in the CSJ tradition. Each come from different organizations, from different industries, with different missions and governance structures, addressing different needs, but all bound and guided by the CSJ charism. Please join me in welcoming them. Sister Kit Gray, a sister of St. Joseph of Orange and lifelong educator, former General Superior of her congregation, who currently serves as Novice Director and Director of Initial Formation. Sister Maureen O'Connor, a sister of St. Joseph of Carondelet, another lifelong educator, current member of the Los Angeles Province leadership team, having completed a tour of duty as principal of St. Brendan School. Mary Rose Batungbacal, principal of St. Mary's Academy, the oldest continuously operating Catholic high school in Los Angeles, and a double alumna of LMU, including our School of Education's renowned Place Corps program. Shannon Green, the inaugural director of the CSJ Institute at Mount St. Mary's University. And an important note here, in addition to her tenure at the Mount, Shannon is also the former director of campus ministry at Marymount, California University, and studied at Loyola University Chicago, which means she just won LMU bingo. Congratulations, Shannon. Shawna Smith, a nonprofit executive and current executive director of Hope Builders, a vocational training and services organization attending to the needs of marginalized communities in Orange County. And last but certainly not least, Jeffrey Thies, clinical associate professor and director of the Institute for Business Ethics and Sustainability here at the LMU College of Business Administration, and a former vice president of St. Joseph's Health. Our present moment is a challenging one. Time is a very precious commodity, so I'm very grateful that each of you are sharing some of your time with us at LMU this afternoon. Thank you for being here. We will be making time for questions from our participants towards the end, so please post those in the chat or the Q&A chat when the time comes. Until then, panelists, you are unfortunately stuck with my questions, and I would like to begin with our sisters, Maureen and Kit. So, Sister Maureen, I'll start with you. Introduce us, if you would, please, to the CSJ charism and what may have brought that, what did bring that into being?
Well, the CSJ charism is one of unifying love with God and with all neighbors without distinction. And I think it came into being in the 17th century there in mid-France, because much of the situations in 1650 Le Puy are very similar to what is happening in our world today. And the Sisters of St. Joseph wanted to move from the cloister out to be with the folks, to be with the people. And one of the biggest sellers, for want of a better word at that time, was lace. And so the sisters themselves learned the skill of lace making, and then they moved to share that with women so that women would have skills to be able to support themselves and their families and also be recognized with dignity. And I think it's interesting that what was happening in 1650 in that small town of Le Puy is continuing to happen today in our world. I was struck when Shawna was introduced. She works with hope builders. And I think that's what the sisters in those early days were trying to give, not just women, but all of the people with whom they came in contact with in Le Puy, hope. And that's what we continue to do 350 years later.
Well, 350 years later, the charism is still very much alive, but for those of us too that partner with your congregations a variety of different ways are quite familiar with the founding story. It's central to the work of all the Sisters of St. Joseph congregations. So I'm wondering if, Sister Kit, if I could pose this question to you. What is it about Le Puy? What is it about the founding location and that particular time in history that is so central to the work of the sisters and their lay partners 350 years later?
Well, I think if we can sketch a picture of France in the 17th century, that would give us a context for looking at Le Puy. The monarchy is still really strong. 1650 is a post-war time. There had been civil and religious wars. I mean, people against people, Huguenots against the others. So people in France, and particularly in southern France, were economically poor. There were economic and social divisions that were really had some similarity to today. Families were apart. A group of believers was different from another group of believers. The economics of the social classes was really very stark. So that the economic and social and political system, I think, is really important. It's 100 years after after St. Ignatius and the founding of the Jesuits. It's also a time of some religious revival in France, and the Jesuits are part of that. So here in the midst of this economic and social disintegration and division, the Jesuits said, we've got to get out there with the people and revitalize faith and hope. So Father Madai, the founder of the Sisters of St. Joseph, is one of those traveling preachers. And he goes to this little town of Le Puy, south of Paris, you know, not the biggest place in the world. And he meets women who are interested in growing in their relationship with Christ and serving people. And as Maureen said, they want to do it differently than the cloistered paradigm that was religious life at the time. So here's Father Madai wanting to reinstill hope, faith and hope in the population, finding women that want to do that same thing. And he really kind of pulls them together through his relationship with each of them. And as Maureen says, he articulates a charism that is all about active unioning, inclusive love in a time where people are fragmented and divided.
It's interesting to think that only probably 100 years prior, European explorers even came across California. So here we are 350 years later, and two congregations have made their way to a part of the planet that at that time was probably unfamiliar still to most people in Le Puy. Your congregations are the more recent ones, the more recent of the pioneer congregations that made their way to the West after a number of congregations settled in the United States. Tell me a little bit about each of your respective histories of your congregations that brought them to the West, to California, and perhaps specifically to Los Angeles. Maureen, we'll start with you. Oh, you're muted, Maureen.
In 1836, the Sisters of St. Joseph responded to the Archbishop in St. Louis and sent women to St. Louis to begin teaching the deaf. And then in 1870, not so many years later, they responded, 7 of them responded to a request from the then bishop in Tucson, Arizona, and they trekked across the desert to respond to that. And so in Arizona, they began schools, hospitals, orphanages, and they worked there for a number of years until they decided, at the invitation of Los Angeles in 1889, to come to Los Angeles to start St. Mary's Academy down on, I think it was 121st Street and Grand Avenue, to respond to education for women. And it's from there in 1889 that then they went on to parishes, hospitals. We really didn't get into social service work until later, much later, probably around the time of the Vatican Council. But again, always moving forward, always aware, as Kit mentioned, of inclusivity and reaching out particularly to the poor. It's interesting when I look back at our history in the early days in Los Angeles, we were in most of the inner city schools. I look at the parishes today of Holy Cross, St. Cecilia's, just so many of them that even now are still inner city. And St. Mary's Academy, which I'm sure Mary Rose will speak to, it moved from the inner city at Slauson and Crenshaw in the 60s to where it is now in Inglewood, but always responding to the needs of the poor.
Thank you, Kit. Oh, you're muted as well, Kit.
Thank you. Maureen gave a great segue. If all of us here around the table and those sharing in the webinar this morning can envision a tree with 1650 as the roots and a refoundation in the 1800s. And then, as Maureen said, French sisters coming to the United States in 1836. So that's all the trunk. And from that trunk come all these branches. And Sisters of St. Joseph of Orange are the tip of a branch where Sisters of St. Joseph moved through Concordia, Kansas, to LaGrange, Illinois, to Orange, California. And that move from LaGrange, Illinois to Orange, California took place in 1912. And our founder, Mother Bernard, was invited to send sisters to Eureka, California, Northern California, to take over a school founded previously by another religious community who had gone back to their East Coast origins. So 1912, just a little ahead of the flu epidemic here in the United States, our sisters took over an elementary school, and then during the flu epidemic responded to the needs of people. We have kind of an iconic photo of them in front of their car with their masks on and their medical bag. They were going out to homes to minister. And as I said to the other panelists, I wish I knew more about that, what that meant in terms of their thoughts, their feelings, and the reactions of people. At any rate, the congregation, starting with 6 sisters from LaGrange, Illinois to Eureka, California, expanded. And our first the sisters first came to Orange County to St. Joseph's School in Santa Ana, even before we moved our mother house from Eureka to Orange. And that move took place in 19 22. So this year we're celebrating 100 years in the city of Orange. This has been a hub. It's not been our only place. So we expanded in healthcare through hospitals throughout California and Texas. We served in elementary schools throughout California. We had a small high school of our own in San Diego until the 70s. We've served in higher education. We have a spirituality center, a retreat center, and we have been, I would say our history is similar to what Maureen said. Our efforts in social justice, social outreach really took off in the 70s. I think if we look at the stories of our schools and hospitals, much was being done there for persons that we would call social justice. However, in the 70s, we started a Center for Justice. We were doing more overt advocacy. We were working in partnership with others in some of the social issues. So that's the quick history. 1912 from LaGrange to Eureka to Orange in 1922. And thank you for your gracious introduction, Michael. I think we have touched a lot of people through our sisters and our ministries.
I think there's a fun note here, if I may make. When we envision people coming west, I think of the sisters coming west at the turn of the last century. You're not exactly getting a bus and take Interstate 10. I believe the write-up includes steamboats and covered wagons.
Yes, well, Maureen can speak to that, but yes, we came from LaGrange to actually San Francisco by train, and then from San Francisco into Humboldt Bay on a steamship, and they were grounded as they tried to get in there to begin with.
Mm.
And I thought finding a parking spot in LA was challenging. Puts things in perspective.
Yeah.
Before we move forward, I wanted to pick up on something, Maureen, you said. When talking about the charism, the words "without distinction." I wonder if you can unpack that a bit more. That's a fairly critical piece here.
I think it relates very much to what Kit had said about inclusivity, because really reaching out to the neighbors without distinction, regardless of race, of gender, of economic status, whatever, everyone is part of this unifying love charism. And therefore we try to make, I think, greater efforts also to go along with what Pope Francis is asking us to do today. Don't forget the poor. Stand with the poor. And I think our community in Peru back in the late 60s really responded to that. It was the Median conference, it seems to me, and they decided to really minister only with the poor. And so they had been in a military hospital in Lima, moved out of the hospital, about 6 sisters, and went out to the boonies really of Lima and around, and really began to educate the people. And today we have a fairly good-sized province of Sisters of St. Joseph in Peru, in response to what those women did, those 50 years ago.
Terrific. Before we move into talking about kind of present day ministries, I'd like to take a moment here, just a minute, to play a quick video that is part of a series produced by the CSJ Institute. And I think this particular video here, Shannon was kind enough to bring it to my attention, captures quite eloquently what the charism means to some individuals. So here we go.
I was called to go see the
You can all hear that, right? Thank you.
guy sleeping under this pile of trash. And how are you doing? Oh, I'm doing okay. I'm doing okay. What do you need? He pulls out of his pocket this dirty old $1 bill, and he says, "Could you go across the street for me to Circle K and buy me a cup of coffee? Because I'm not allowed in there." Standing in line with his cup of coffee. Really odd feeling, you know. I'm allowed in here and he isn't. If this is so hopeless that I'm never going to be able to come closer with bringing those worlds together, to bring about unity of neighbor with neighbor, why do I keep coming back here every day? Why am I doing this? It's because I believe in the power of God, the power of love to do what I can't do. That was a very profound moment of what the charism looks like. Divide the city, go out to the streets, be with the people. What do the people need? You just go be with them. They'll tell you what they need.
I think that captures
The
it
world
well.
is changing. We can't stay with our
Oh,
old stuff.
oh, sorry.
Like the yesterday thoughts. The world needs new things. Scientific.
What happens when you put it on autoplay? I think, Shannon, I just have one production note. You've got someone making a comment of power of love. I think you need a Huey Lewis number in that song. I think that captures the charism really well. So thinking about that, I'd like to open this to our other panelists. And Mary Rose, I'd like to start with you, if I may. Tell us a little bit about your work, the work of St. Mary's Academy, and as an educator, where have you found the CSJ charism to be unique to that particular field?
Thank you, Mike. So I've been at St. Mary's Academy. I'm going on my 12th year and then my 5th year as principal at this amazing institution. And I really believe that the charism that was eloquently described by Sister Maureen and Sister Kit it gives us purpose. It reminds me every single day, what miracles can happen when you empower a group of women. And it goes back to that story, the founding story, and how it can be applicable today. At St. Mary's, we are an all-girls institution. It's about building women up and inspiring the youth to make a difference, particularly in our community. We are positioned in an amazing place of Inglewood, where there's a lot of growth, a lot of newness, a lot of people that we need to tend to. And what drives us is the charism of the CSJs to serve the dear neighbor, to empower our young women to make a difference. And not only we do that by serving the students within our community and in the surrounding neighborhood, and we build them up so that they can give back to their own neighborhoods. And that's our purpose. That's what gets me up every single day, excited to come to this institution. As we all know, the challenges of being in education at this day and age, it's incredibly taxing. It's constantly pivoting and adjusting, but this is what the CSJs did from the very beginning, responding to the needs of the times. And so every day I'd like to believe that we are adapting and we are evolving and we are just becoming more resilient and better at our craft. And so that's really the connection. I think that's what allows all of us who are part of the CSJ ministry to be proud of and hold firm to, that we go back to that story at Le Puy of the 6 sisters who divided the city, discerned and took action. That's what we do every day. And to do that in the lens of education, particularly in a high school setting where there's so much transformation that happens between the ages of 12 to 16 years old, the future is very bright. And I think that's really, it hits home to me personally and professionally.
Rose, thank you. I really appreciate your very hopeful response to that. Jeff, I'll pass on the similar question to yourself, having spent a number of years as an executive at the St. Joseph healthcare system. How kind of share with us your story of working in a healthcare system such as that, and how you saw the charism in healthcare play itself out differently than perhaps other healthcare systems or hospitals.
Well, and thank you so much. And I just want to say I'm so profoundly honored to be part of this panel and being able to talk about this. I grew up in Orange County. I've been touched by the Sisters of St. Joseph my whole life. I've been able to work with and minister with the Sisters of St. Joseph my whole life in lots of different places. And so it's a great honor to have this conversation. When I joined St. Joseph's Health, I'd been a marketing executive for 15 years, and that was an industry that moved at 100 miles an hour. And the whole deal there was just make a decision and act and all of these kinds of things. And my first day, I got a call from another executive there, and he said, let me take you to lunch. And we went to lunch, and he said, let me explain something about the culture here. Who you involve in the decision is more important than the speed with which you make the decision. And I thought that was one of the best descriptions of the charism, really, of relationship. We can unpack dimensions of this and how a complex health system embodies this, but being in relationship with and discerning together and making sure that the right voices are part of the process of discernment and decision-making is absolutely characteristic and played out in so many different ways. And there were a lot of times I would be involved in different kinds of board meetings of the different organizations within the health system. And there were always, by policy, sisters on the boards. And you just knew there would be a point at which a sister would raise her hand and say, who's missing from this decision? Who should be here? What voice needs to be a part of this? And I just saw that charism embody itself in so many profound ways. And so, again, we could chat more about the specifics of that, but that's what strikes me.
Wonderful, Jeffrey, thank you. Similar question to you, Shawna. Your organization provides a really unique and creative, pioneering service to residents of Orange County. Share with us a little bit about your organization, your work there, and how the charism shapes and guides the mission at your organization.
Well, I appreciate so much that Sister Maureen really just hit the nail on the head when she made the connection to kind of the early history of the sisters and how that was really a catalyst for changing the dynamics of the time. And you know, that's still the work we're doing today in Orange County through Hope Builders. I think what's beautiful about how the Sisters of St. Joseph go about doing that and how that charism is reflected is that they root themselves in the community. They don't come in as outsiders with all the answers. They come in as neighbors. And I think because of that, they're able to use their unique gifts and talents to leverage local assets to transform, to heal, and to unlock opportunity. And to me, that's the work of Hope Builders as well in the community, that we're continuing that tradition today in Central Orange County where the need is great. And it's not passive, it's an active dismantling of barriers, but by responding to the needs in very practical ways. It's not big, grandiose, it's practical responses, again, like looking to neighbors and inviting the community in to be part of the solution, and meeting people where they're at. You know, at Hope Builders, we have something called operating instructions. And one of our operating instructions is in our presence in the community, it is to meet people where they are at and serve them where they're at, not to expect them to be something else, right? But to come up to the need and to serve from that place. I think the other, something I've personally gotten, but I think has been definitely an expression of the charism is how the Sisters of St. Joseph bring others into partnership with them. So it's really this community of co-ministers, and the accompanying that happens, not only of those of us doing the work together, but with those that are being served. So there's a beautiful focus on relationship and relationship building, and that really through that relationship, we honor the dignity and the wholeness of people, and through that comes healing.
Terrific. Thank you so much, Shawna. Shannon, similar question. but if I may add to that, outline the work of your institute, your new institute to us, because it's part of a university. It's not necessarily a mission office, and it's not necessarily there is to serve only the university. It's something new. It's something different. Tell us about it in your work.
Yeah, thank you, Michael, and good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be with all of you and to be part of this conversation of what we now like to call the family of Joseph, right? So we're all members of this family. And it's my privilege to be the director of the CSJ Institute at Mount St. Mary's University. And the Institute was founded at the Mount in 2016. And it's really to ensure that we are advancing the charism of the Sisters of St. Joseph, our founders, and those parts of the charism and the mission and the vision that everybody has so eloquently already described for us. You're right in that we're not exactly a mission office like you might find or in Catholic higher education or in healthcare mission integration, but we do a lot of that same kind of work in terms of sharing the mission, sharing the stories, forming the members of our community in our own tradition, making sure people are invited to embrace that tradition for themselves. But we also advance research here at the university. We do a lot of spiritual formation through pilgrimages. And as you just witnessed, we are conducting an oral history project of our Sisters of St. Joseph. And we have interviewed nearly 70 of the members of the Los Angeles province so that we can have both the full-length histories and stories for research, but also those materials, that footage for educational and inspirational films. But the vision of the CSJ Institute, we knew here at the Mount and throughout the province that the culture and the mission of the Sisters is strong. Everybody, who works here, it's palpable, you can feel it. You might have some words for it, but because we're in a time and a place where we don't have as many sisters present in our institutions, how do we articulate this into the future? How do we instill this in the next generation? And that is what the Institute gets to do, both for the Mount and then more recently, we've been able to expand to really fully commit to the other ministries of the province, like St. Mary's Academy and our other academies in the St. Joseph Center, as well as other ministries that were founded by our sisters, but maybe aren't technically sponsored. And we also do work now with the US Federation and put on various programs, whether it's our films, our pilgrimages, those kinds of things. And it's just such a privilege to be able to share this mission and invite others into it.
Great. Shannon, thank you. Shawna, I'd actually like to go back to something you brought up, and I think it'd be nice for the whole panel to kind of expand on this or speak to their own experiences. This idea of the importance of partnerships. Oftentimes, when you think of any type of organization, at least in the popular imagination here, companies and organizations usually have, especially since the tech industry popped up, kind of this love of the auteur, be it kind of the auteur CEO, or even so far to say the cult of the personality. But a lot of the organizations that are present here today don't, one, seem to have that, and two, in turn, rely mostly on partnerships and connecting with other people. Why is that important, and why that way, you think?
Well, I think in my experience, the sisters are humble to a fault. But it's also their superpower, because I think in not putting themselves in the lead, they leave open, and I think they leave open the opportunity for others who care about a similar cause or need, or to respond and to step into that. That contributes to the long-term sustainability of the ministries and other efforts they start, because they are not dependent on the sisters to give them life and to keep them going, right? And they're masterful at formation. in my experience, both in I think doing it in a very conscious way, but also just in, again, through the charism, I think how they build it into the DNA of the organizations and the efforts that they're part of.
Appreciate that. Thank you, Shawna. And along those same lines, Jeff, I would love to get your thoughts on a similar ideas. Having worked in St. Joseph Health in terms of formation of directors and administrators, how do you form these partners? What were some of the experiences you had or some of the tools you utilized in terms of educating and forming these partners that would carry on these works to a particular point of, determined amount of time?
Yeah, so thank you. Let me first just focus on that concept of partnership, because within the Ministry of Healthcare in St. Joseph Health, that's just really been foundational. Sisters were invited. Sister Kit spoke of the story of the flu pandemic in Eureka, 100 years ago, being invited in to run a hospital, that this really began with a partnership between community need and community leaders, working in partnership with clinicians and physicians, et cetera, while sisters, took more and more responsibility, both in building these ministries of healthcare and extending them out. This commitment to the cultivation of partnership drives how the organizations really engage the need of healthcare now. Providence, St. Joseph itself is an expression of partnership. The ongoing and outreach in cultivation of expanding collaboration and mergers and partnerships is just so critical. So I really want to affirm that. And it goes back to that first, charism and call in Lepuy to go out 2 by 2 into the community, identify the need, partner, and then, as Shawna said, with the humility to a fault, then step back as the partners carry the mission forward. So that really is just so embedded in every piece of it, really from the beginning. In terms of formation, there's just so many different ways in which the healthcare system really built formation and formation programming as foundational throughout both leadership development, but also really within the experience of all colleagues. And just a couple of things I would say. One is that it cultivated within the culture of the organization a commitment to the mission, vision, and values of the organization. And the mission of the organization is to continue the charism in the embodiment that it takes in healthcare ministry. I have to tell an anecdote I learned from Sister Kit. We were at a trustee conference for different boards of directors throughout the health system. And somebody came up to interview her and said to her, the Sisters of St. Joseph got into the healthcare ministry because they were called to help people. And she said, no, we were called to bring people together and bring them to God. And we believe that the healthcare ministry is a vibrant way to do that. And that expression really just embodied it. And so I know when I interviewed, for example, to join St. Joseph Health, all of the business executives were referring to the work as ministries, and our ministry in Fullerton and our ministry in Lubbock and and that was a language that was adopted and really owned. And then formation programs were established, a foundational mission and mentoring program that is 7 retreats over the course of 12 months that are not just executives, but to the director and manager level would participate in, to really both understand the call, the history, the tradition of the charism, and then how it means to be lived today. We would use an expression, we're not supposed to do what the sisters did, but we're supposed to look at the world the way the sisters have and bring that same vision to the world we encounter today. That really was what the point of that formation was. The sisters were founders of a collaboration that became something called Ministry Leadership Center, that was another 3 years of formation programming for the most senior executives on the West Coast. And then Shannon mentioned a pilgrimage, and I got out for this. You can't see it. This is my pilgrimage book from our CSJ Heritage Pilgrimage, when we would go to walk in the footsteps of the sisters, to sit in their kitchen, to walk in the footsteps of Father Madai, to visit the birthplace and the burial of Sister Mother St. John Fontbonne, to be commissioned in the chapel in Lyon, where the sisters were missioned to St. Louis, as Sister Maureen mentioned. These experiences really to anchor our hearts and spirits really in the call. And then, like I said, in all of the ways that others have spoken of, this takes institutional life, and it's manifested in lots of work of community benefit, of hospitals, of medical systems, of broadening collaborations. But it's all anchored in that sense of that wonderful picture of Le Puy there in the background now, Shannon. Thank you so much. So anyway, I'll stop there, but that's where it is.
Jeff, thank you. Really appreciate that. Mary Rose, similar question for you. Partnership building at St. Mary's and in education. Education obviously is a bit of a no-brainer, but when it comes to working with parents, for example, but how might you build partnerships with community members and other organizations that continue the work of St. Mary's, such as it is?
So thank you for that question. No, it's another reminder that nothing can be done or is done in silos. And there is a value to doing things in community with others. It's critical, right, to really tend to the needs of the people. And as you mentioned, you know, we in the world of education, all the answers are not found in our institution. We can't educate them from just that one lens. So to educate them fully, it requires both home and school life, and getting our parents on board with that. And in order for us to do that, you know, we have been blessed to have the financial, the resource and networking support from a variety of our donors to keep our school and our mission sustainable and vibrant. We continue to serve the poor. We continue to serve those with need. Our community is so unique. We are comprised predominantly of young women of color who come to St. Mary's and get the quality education they have. And we are proud to get them to college and finish college and do that as close to debt-free as possible. These are proud moments. I think this time in the school year is where I just can, when I hear all the different college acceptances from our students, I hear all their different scholarships and all the partners in their education that they're receiving. It's very humbling to know that a student's success is not determined by just one other person or by them alone. It takes a village, and that includes the teachers at our school, the leaders, their family, themselves, all the different donors, all of the different programs that continue to line up with us and give them opportunities outside of their normal life. And it takes a village. And I think that's what, you know, when I hear partnership, I think of community. So
appreciate it. Shannon, similar in the same vein, what do you see as the CSJ Institute's role perhaps in relationship building across the network of CSJ organizations, the family of Joseph, as you say?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's interesting just listening to everyone. It's like these are all the same things I wrote down. So it's really amazing, the consistent experience of empowerment, of partnership, of just advancing that charism of radical inclusion and love without distinction. And one of the ways that I think about our work here at the Institute is we get to be the great, evangelizers of this great charism and the storytellers, which, again, just hearing everybody's articulation of their own connection to this history that starts in Le Puy is profound. And it says to me that it is a very accessible, very needed charism, mission, vision for our times, for our days. Our students, we're a women's college. We're a Hispanic serving institution. We at Mount St. Mary's talk about educating the daughters of Los Angeles. We are very local in that sense. And it's a very, very empowering mission and charism that, as everyone has said, for us, it starts with our women students and of course our other programs as well. But it's always meant to be going out, right? It's always meant to educate our students through, a model of that lace making empowerment. But it doesn't stop there. It's for our students, our graduates, to then educate or to lift up or to serve their communities in that model of partnership, in that model of empowerment, in that model of community and connection. And I think the Institute, we're just thrilled to be able to do that through developing resources that we can share, and then building partnerships for us. We've been asking ourselves, what are the needs of our partners? How can we use our resources, the time and energy we're so gifted to be able to dedicate to furthering the mission and charism? How do we give that away? Because nothing is proprietary. This is all to be shared. We just want to invite people into a tradition and a practice and a spirituality that they probably already resonate with, but just don't necessarily know. Like our faculty and staff, they've been doing this work, I'm sure, in healthcare and all these other places. It's, they're doing the work of the mission and charism already, and we can help them sustain that by giving them a framework, some ownership, some excitement, and some belonging around identifying with the mission and charism. And if I could just add, briefly, I've worked in lay ministry for many years now, for probably 5 or 6 different religiously sponsored institutions or orders. So I, say, like, the layperson doesn't get to choose her charism, right? Like you get the charism that for whoever you're working for at that time. But for me, the CSJ charism, which I actually first learned from the Oranges when I moved to LA about 10 years ago, because my husband's at LMU, it just resonated with me so strongly, and it was very natural. And I think that, we say to our students, or anybody, you say, tell the story of the Sisters of St. Joseph of Lepuy. Sounds like LA, sounds like California, sounds like our world. Do we need unifying love? And I say, is there a need for this charism today? And of course, in our most stark, polarized times, of course. And I've had to come, I've learned to really trust that if a charism is still needed, the Spirit's going to keep giving it, right? The Spirit is going to keep giving us the gifts and the charisms that we need to repair our world and to engage in that. And so that's where I'm so hopeful and excited and so privileged to be a part of this, because it's the future. I mean, the Spirit's going to keep giving this to us and inspiring us to work in this way, as long as there's a need for it in the world. And so that's how we approach our work here at the Institute, is we just want to give away that story and that identity to whoever feels empowered by it.
Thank you, Shannon. Maureen and Kit, along those lines, how might, piggybacking off of Shannon's comment about working for those of us that are working in lay ministry, lay education, how might those of us that are non-professed understand and embrace the charism that has traditionally been associated with religious life? How do you see that translating to the non-professed communities?
Well, one way we have been privileged to see it be translated is through the work of the Charism Institute. These last 5 years, what Shannon Green and all her associates have been able to do in sharing with all of our sponsored ministries, it's just been marvelous. But I wanted to add one thing. When Shawna spoke, she spoke about partnerships. And Michael, when you first asked me if I would be part of this panel and that the Sisters of Orange were going to be part of it, I went back and remembered the last 40 years when we have been able, the Carondelets and the Oranges have been able to partner together. In the mid-'80s, when AIDS was just so alive, especially here in LA, the CSJs, Orange and Carondelet, got together and started the Gathering Place. It was in probably close to downtown Los Angeles, and it was a gathering place for those who had AIDS. And these sisters of both communities and some of their lay associates helped in that as it started. Then came the mid-90s, and 7 or 8 congregations, including the Oranges and ourselves, got together to go to what Mary Rose talked about, looking at the needs of the time. And we realized that there were places in the Los Angeles and San Fernando Valley area that needed a response. They needed help. And so these 8 or 9 communities got together and started the Los Angeles Ministry Project, which is alive today, the LAMP Project. And the social service sisters helped us a great deal. And we searched out places, and we ended up in South Central LA, where that was the greatest need. A little bit time after that, one of the CSJs, Judy Vaughn, felt the need to help women and children. The Oranges reached out to help us finance Alexandria House, which is just really alive and well today, responding over the last 30 years to the needs of women and children. So I look at that, and I look at our history, and I think, even today, some of you, Shannon mentioned before this started, some of you were part of learning more about border compassion, the move that Suzanne Jabro is behind in responding to the migrants at the border. The Oranges are a big part of that, together with the Carondelets. And there's a plan, had COVID not come along, both groups were planning to go down last month, especially those who can speak Spanish, to help respond, but they're going to do it later on, probably in April or May. So there's a partnership that goes on among the Sisters of St. Joseph, as well as partnerships with Providence Health or all of the others that I think Shawna was speaking of. So I just wanted to bring that to everyone's attention, because I think, again, it illustrates the importance of the family of Joseph.
Yeah, appreciate that. Kit, any thoughts on that yourself? You're muted, sorry.
My thoughts are going in so many different directions. However, let me just pick up on what Maureen has said. Maureen and I were in leadership a while ago together, and the partnership she's talking about grew out of our, leadership team to leadership team relationships. We have friends in each community, and we were doing other things together, bringing our sisters together to reflect on the charism and to give support to one another. So I really want to emphasize that many of those practical initiatives came out of that relationship and our being together. I want to pick up, to answer your question, Michael, on things that I heard Shannon and Jeff say that really touched me. I don't believe that I or we as Sisters of St. Joseph give the charism. Charism is a gift of God. Mm. And our congregations have it for a purpose. And so I believe there's a way that we can talk about that. But as I look at us around the table here and hear us, I think that what we give is, Shannon, you said it, a framework, or we give, Jeff, you talked about it as language, the issue of, the way you make a decision is who's around the table or who have you brought in. I think people connect to one another through the charism. And that's been really my experience person to person and in my own ministry experiences. So you asked Jeff about formation. I did a lot of formation in the health system. I never thought it was about giving the charism. It was opening up the conversation. What drives you? What can you identify in this mission statement? Where are we, of one mind and heart? And this language helps to talk about that. That's so it's a slightly different way. I think Maureen will agree with this too. I think our language in the whole family of Joseph in the last number of years has not been about us having the charism, but the charism having us. And that really what we're all doing is responding to that call to, there's so many ways to talk about it, to bring about unity and reconciliation, to active inclusive love, to partnership. I think though that's what I hear in Mary Rose and Shawna and Shannon and Jeff. This charism talk gives a language for that. And then kind of the final word on that is something that is so important to me. In our constitutions, when we talk about our mission to bring people together and bring them to God, that's my reductionist language, to bring about this unity between all people with one another and with God. And today we would say, and with all creation. It flows from the mission of Jesus, that all may be one. So again, I know that in my own life, I've really been working at less language that sounds like ownership of the charism and the charism that we share.
Thank you, Kit, very much. At this time, we're going to go ahead and open it up for questions with our audience. So please go ahead and post those questions in the Q&A. And as you're doing that, I'd like to ask a question myself, if I may, of this body. It appears to me one of the hallmarks or spirit of the charism that perhaps is not articulated in language, but certainly I feel, and including the history of the sisters and their ministries, there's a spirit, there's a pioneering spirit. There's a literal pioneering history. There's a spirit of entrepreneurship. There's a spirit of innovation. Ideas and concepts that we usually associate with, the entertainment or the tech industries, certainly not with religious life or religion as a whole. And yet they're very much part and parcel of the lived life and experience. I'd be curious as to your individual thoughts present here about that sense of pioneership, about that sense of entrepreneurship. What is it that drives you and your organizations and you to continue to serve, even amidst hardships and questions of sustainability? I'd be very curious on your thoughts on that. Whoever wants to jump in.
Can I jump in on that really?
Jump away.
Yeah. So I think one of the great gifts of the charism, there's so many ways. This visionary charism has these very kind of practical applications and expressions, right? And our sisters talk a lot about helping us to hold things lightly. And that during COVID has been our mantra: hold things lightly, hold things lightly. But what that helps us to do is, and I think this is what the sisters have done over these centuries, is to be flexible, to be adaptable, right? To be it comes from that responding to the needs of the times. To respond to the needs of the times, you have to have deep awareness. You have to do social analysis. You have to ask your neighbors. You have to pay attention to what is going on, and then you have to discern. And all of that has been mentioned already, right? But I think because of that constant practice, the tradition doesn't really allow us to get stuck. We have to constantly be aware and flexible. And then that means we have to let things go and we have to try new things and we have to learn new skills. And one of the things I love to tell our students about our sisters is those who learned Spanish at age 50, those who got PhDs in the classics, but went on to run a hospital. Those, there's this changing and adapting and getting the skills that you need and the partners that you need to respond to the needs of the times. And to me, when that is done well, there's so much creativity. There's so much innovation, and because you're seeing the world being made new and responding to that over and over again. So that's where I see that spirit as being rooted in the tradition of the sisters.
Thank you, Shannon. Appreciate that. Shawna, Jeff, Mary Rose, any thoughts on that?
Maybe just two things quickly. I'm sorry. One is that our executives came back from the Lopuy pilgrimage really inspired by the innovation of the First Sisters. With Father Madai moving beyond the cloister into the community itself was innovative. And when they understood that and came back really knowing that that innovation was in the root, that gave permission to do two things. One is to constantly be in partnership with what the community needs that drives the agenda. And then the second one is to experiment with structures and new ways of trying to work together and be together or start new things. The Innovation Institute, for example, was started by St. Joseph Health to build a structure for creativity outside of the structure of nonprofit healthcare, for example. So there's a lot of experimentation, but it really anchored in the fundamental experience of those First Sisters, and that was really inspirational and kind of liberating.
Appreciate that. Shawna, Mary Rose, any thoughts on that? Yeah, Mary Rose, please.
So when I hear the word innovation and creativity, it goes again back to that story and the lace. And we think of lace, it's so delicate, it's so fragile, it's outdated. There's no, it's great to look at, right? But what's the function behind it? From the outside perspective, but looking into it and the way that the sisters used it as a means of living, as a way to make money and provide resources to the community is so innovative and it's so inspiring. And it's a story that we tell our students very often of they can make a difference with a simple tools as the things that you need to make lace. You can empower and make transformative change. And I think that is where it starts. It's in our history, and it just continues on. And it's another source of, we're going through a lot of facility renovations at the school. And we have now an innovation lab. It's going to be a center where students are going to be honored and valued for their creativity with a low risk, low stakes. It's just there, but they have the resources there to make whatever they want to create change and an impact in their community. And I think it starts with the lace. It's the jumping off point to where we are now.
Shawna, that sounds very much like what your organization is dedicated to.
Absolutely. And I sort of just say amen to everything that was said before. And I'll just add one thing is that I think it's just a belief in God's abundance. So if you come from a place of abundance, then you believe what you need is there. It's just about bringing it to the surface, right? And so I think it's that optimism, that hopefulness, that together, and it is about the power of love. I think that video was it touched me so deeply about that idea of the power of love, the power of God to fill in what's not yet there, right? And that's through us. And so anyhow, I guess I would just add that to this part of the conversation is the role. And if you come from a place of abundance, then you believe anything is possible.
Here's a question coming in. In what ways has the pandemic challenged your sense of charism or your work as a whole, or perhaps even changed it? I think that's a question all of us are licensed to answer. Who would like to speak to that one first? I know it hasn't affected healthcare education, so I know there's not much you can contribute there.
I'll just say, because, certainly at the Mount, it's about education, but for the Institute, it's about the charism. So specifically, it's, we just had to keep asking ourselves, how do we advance the charism in a time when we can't be together? you know, and how, what are the needs? How do we even know what the needs are so that we can respond? And so there were many, you know, we just kind of, you know, like everyone pivoted and did what we were called to do and did it on Zoom instead of doing it, you know, live. But that we had to sit in that place for a long time. And I will say again, the founding story really fed us, really held us, because in 1650 there was a plague. You know, I learned Jean-Pierre Médaille, a third of his province brothers died of the plague, 30% of the Jesuits of Toulouse. So these are, you know, these were people they knew. These are their neighbors, you know, these are their brothers and sisters who died from the plague. And yet these 6 women responded. And I think, you know, we talk about the empowerment of, you know, this group of 6 women and Jean-Pierre Médaille as the founders. We're founded by a community of people who found a way to respond to absolutely overwhelming demands and needs, which, you know, I can relate, right? It's very overwhelming, but they did it in these very practical and hope-filled ways. So I think that story of, so I thought, you know, the sisters responded, people will respond. People are going to keep responding. You know, we're going to find ways to respond, just as they did in the plague then, just as we have a plague now. So it wasn't easy, but it did help us to trust that we would be led to find ways to respond. And I will just say, you know, by putting everything on Zoom and having all these programs and opportunities for formation, inspiration, and education meant that our sisters all over the state, all over, you know, those who couldn't normally leave Carondelet Center or their, you know, whatever their homes could Zoom in, and we built even greater connections and community. And that was the great gift that the pandemic has, you know, an unexpected gift that we've received.
Well said. Any other thoughts, friends, before we move on? Kit?
Well, I think the Zoom experience of really bringing people together, it gets played out in my life every week. We have a program on Saturdays that has 100 and some people for women in initial formation. The United States, Africa, Ireland, England, you know, so we've really done a lot of that. I also have experienced the power of small things. Several food distribution programs in our immediate area had to shut down. And so we started this very small Sunday distribution. And our sisters and other, you know, members of our family of Joseph made these lunches and made them available for people who could walk on our campus, pick them up and leave. I mean, it's so small. And yet we just made that one effort to fill in. Shawna, you use that language quite often, to fill in for some things that were missing. So we didn't start a whole new food program and a food bank and but we just did what we could do in partnership with so many of our friends and colleagues. So I offer it as an example. Do the smallest thing. Do the smallest thing.
Thank you, Kit. Mary Rose, I don't know if you had your hand if you want to respond to that. Did I catch that correctly?
Yes.
Oh,
thank you,
please, go
Michael.
ahead.
So I think with, you know, while we're still going through this pandemic, it is definitely, we've been required or responded to focus on the essentials, right? To simplify is not a bad thing. It allows us to really be more intentional, to allow us to put more energies into one thing versus too many things. I mean, even just going through this, what we realize is what the priority is the care of our community, the health and safety of our community. Right now, we are going through our second week of distance learning. where we are erring obviously on the side of caution and being mindful of the needs of our community and needing to be safe and being confident that we can still deliver quality education to them by simplifying and focusing on intentional things. So that has been a big shift for us that, you know, we're still learning and growing through the process. And so there's some obvious downsides, but there's some great upsides to what's going on currently.
Jeff, go ahead, please.
Yeah, this may sound a little philosophical, so I apologize from the beginning, but I think the pandemic has revealed a truth to us that is at the deep root of this tradition, which is that unity, we're fundamentally all connected and it's just us. And in our tradition, the Catholic theological tradition will talk about solidarity, and what we mean by that is that it's us. And sometimes we think that unity is something that we hopefully can achieve if we work hard enough, that one day we'll be connected. But actually, it's the exact opposite. We all are connected, and maybe one day we'll discover the profound truth of that and live up to that reality. In the idea of sustainability, and we look at this from a business perspective at LMU, but in the idea of sustainability says that we fundamentally all function in complex, nested, integrated systems, and we're just all profoundly interconnected. And so the pandemic says, oh, guess what? We're epidemiologically just all connected. And I think if we can allow that to really reveal its truth to us, and we can discover again who we are as human beings, that can really catalyze this idea of what it means to be one and to be in union with each other, because that's just who we are. And of course, we fight it. And so we have all of these divisions and all of these kinds of things, not you, me, and all of that. But that is just the contradiction of what the pandemic teaches us. So how in each of our disciplines do we live up to just what is? I think that's my hope from how we experience the pandemic.
Jeff, thank you. In fact, on your point about sustainability, that's a perfect segue into our next question here. And if I may, I'd actually like to pose it to you first. It is a question about sustainability. Responding to burnout in the pandemic that seems to be quite a common theme. I know it's especially in the hospital systems among doctors and nurses, and we're also seeing that among educators as well as a multitude of different professions. How do we address burnout? The author writes there's a tendency when fighting for justice to burn oneself out in a pious blaze of glory. Is sustainability important, and why should we argue for that?
Boy, I like Kit, so my mind is going in a million different directions related to that question. First, let me say very quickly, and I think this is completely consistent with the charism, the College of Business Administration at Loyola Marymount University is committed to the principles of responsible management education, which is anchored in the Sustainable Development Goals. SDG number 3 is good health and well-being, and that's a foundational dimension of sustainability. So let me just kind of to say that you're really talking about self-care and how we develop practices of care for ourselves, and we create environments where we give not only care to each other, but permission to people to give self-care. And that's really hard. I know that in St. Joseph Health, whole person care and work-life balance was such a foundational commitment of the charism from the Sisters of St. Joseph given to the health system in the foundational documents. And we would say we're committed to that, and we're not always really good at it, and it's really hard. And so, but it's a battle that we acknowledge and we struggle with. The Institute for Business Ethics and Sustainability recently sponsored a meditation retreat program for LMU students using breath meditation techniques to really about self-care and to help deal with the stress and anxiety that students feel. So I think it's an instinct, it's an understanding, it's a permission, and then it lives itself in these things that we do that are profoundly meaningful and maybe small and maybe big, but in their own ways impactful.
Very good.
hope.
Thank you, Jeff. This is a question, looks like it's related to something Maureen and Kit brought up earlier. It would seem that responding to the AIDS crisis in the 1980s was a very accurate reflection of the charism of going outside the cloister to minister and to serve. At that time, was that move uncontroversial within the congregations within the church? My question is, in response to that, do I need to stop the recording for you both to answer? No, I'm kidding. Kit and Maureen, if you're both muted, if you want to respond to that.
I think it was maybe not controversial. I think it was very bold and courageous on the part of both congregations to respond. But I think they did so along with lay associates, and they did the best they could given what they had. And if it were controversial, they still hung in there. That gathering place went on for, I think, almost 10 years and did respond as best they could. And then I think the need diminished somewhat. And perhaps that was why the gathering place folded probably toward the end of the 90s, if I remember correctly. But I don't know that there were pickets or anything against it, to my knowledge. Kip might know more, but.
No, but it's the other side of the coin. And Maureen and I are both testing our memories here. We did go to our local bishops to say we were moving in the direction of this kind of ministry. And I would want to, just a descriptor, it was a kind of drop-in, a day drop-in center with resources and companionship and things like that. And this is my memory, Maureen, is that we didn't meet so much with controversy as with, well, kind of, why would you want to do that? And it goes a little to my earlier point about just do a small thing. We weren't taking on the whole social and medical aspects of this. We were just providing a place to gather, for people to gather, and in so many ways for us to learn. But that's my memory. Not a big controversy so much as kind of a question. Why would you want to do this?
It was a good, I appreciate that response. Thank you. Two questions here, and I think this is they're related. So I think I'd like to preface this with say, let's pivot to the future. We've talked a bit about the past. We've talked quite a bit about the present, but you can't keep a good entrepreneur down. So I don't see the family of St. Joseph resting on its 350-year-old laurels. I think there are more needs to fill, and there's more innovation on the horizon in terms of addressing matters of social service and justice. Question one, and I'll pose this to both you, Maureen and Kit. What are the newest initiatives or needs or steps of your congregations? Where are you working on now?
Well, I knew you were going to ask the question, and it gives me just the opportunity to share our 2021 chapter visioning statement, which sets the direction for our next 5 years. And so we talk about, based on our core values of inclusive love, justice and mercy, zeal and generosity, humility, presence and hospitality, prayer and reflection, joy and hope. And I think we've had all those themes in our conversation today. What we commit ourselves to for the next 5 years is to be creative and innovative in our local and global dialogue and action during the next 5 years on relationship with the church, integral ecology, intercultural living, racism, diversity, equity, and inclusion, and partnerships for charism ministry. That's what we're working on, Michael.
You're working on now. All right. That's a full agenda.
It's a full agenda, and it may not be as practical a response as you might have wanted.
That's what you're working on next in
That's what we're
development. You heard it here, folks.
Yeah, that's right.
We'll look for those lines outside your Apple store in the next 2 years. Along that same line, and I'll pose this. I'd like to pose this question to the panel. This is more of a personal one, though, too. What do you see as the next need, either for yourself or your organization, that you wish to address in the spirit of vicarism? Whoever wants to go first on that.
I think I will say, and I think Sister Kit, you touched on this. That was really beautiful and inspiring, and I think very resonant with the calls to action that the Carondelets wrote in was it 2013 and or 20, yeah, and then was just kind of renewed at the last chapter, which lays out some similar areas. I think one of the ways that I feel the Sisters of St. Joseph have been and continue to be prophetic, and by that I mean the whole of the tradition, is around this, radical inclusion. Everyone belongs. There's a place for everyone. There's, every person has dignity, and I think there's a voice in our church that is needed in that regard. And I think the spirit of the sisters can help lead us in that direction. And I think especially for those of us who work in these, with the public, in education, with the marginalized, we have to find ways to embrace our LGBTQ community. We have to find ways, to undo the scourge of racism. We have to, this is our call. And I think the sisters provide a really prophetic way to make that journey together, and I think can be a real model for our larger church, which struggles with these areas of inclusion and sometimes I think gets a little too caught up in exclusion. Who gets to come and who gets to participate and who doesn't. So I will just say, those communities of color, Native communities, LGBTQIA communities, and our home of the earth, and sustainability, I think are the places that the sisters tradition can help us lead into the future.
Very nice. Jeff, Shawna, Mary Rose, any thoughts on what you see as a matter of justice you think you might be addressing next, or you or your organization?
Well, so, I think while we are very focused on helping disconnected and disadvantaged young adults in our community kind of realize their full potential, I think on the other side, we've been awakened to the need of the employer community and a desire in the employer community to really understand how they can be about change, particularly around issues of racism and diversity and equity and employment opportunity, and how access to employment opportunity can really change the narrative. And so, we're really trying to position ourselves as a resource, right, to also our employer partners. The other, kind of the vehicle through which we achieve our mission at Hope Builders, right, is through that quality job. And those opportunities that allow people to continue to thrive economically. So again, looking to kind of broaden our sense of who we serve and to be a resource in that way.
Fantastic. Wonderful, Shawna. Thank you.
There's an expression that is gaining popularity in business environments, which is stakeholder capitalism versus shareholder capitalism, that the purpose of business is to bring value to all stakeholders and really to be in relationship with stakeholders about understanding what is value and then using the resources to maximize those values. And that's in contrast to prioritizing shareholder value and profitability as the be all and end all purpose. And I'm really struck both in the charism from Lepuy and the embodiment of that in a complex health system like St. Joseph or Providence, St. Joseph, it really embodies stakeholder capitalism. And so a big part of our work in the College of Business Administration is to continually unpack what that means and to help students understand that to be part of both the purpose of business, but really to understand their own professional life and the impact of their professional life in that respect. Sometimes we talk about that on very personal terms, the divided life of, as we'll describe it, if what's most important in your heart can't show up in what you do every day, that really hurts. But on a broader organizational level, if all of our economic activity both creates possibility and yet harm, if we're hurting the world in the way in which we're providing employment, there's some profound dividedness in that needs this charism of coming together and really getting into the nuts and bolts of how to resolve, how to respond to that. So we got a lot of work to do on lots of different levels, and the charism is alive and well in those efforts also.
Thank you for sharing that, Jeff. Mary Rose, any?
Yes.
Or you're just hoping we're just hoping to reopen the campus, which is a good goal.
Again, there's just so much learning that's happened during this time of the pandemic, and so much that has just revealed itself to help us, figure out how we're going to go into the future. Our focus has been and will continue to be on equity and providing equitable opportunities for growth, for leadership, for success for all of our students, whatever that means, however way that means. What we've uncovered during this time is a lot of learning loss. Our youth are struggling. There's so many gaps, there's so many areas and skills that they have not been able to participate or engage in to the fullest extent possible. And what do we do with it? How do we address it? And that's a huge need for us in the world of education. As an all-girls school, looking at, as Shannon touched on it, just the identity of our students and being more inclusive and helping them feel welcomed and a place where they feel safe and feel that sense of belonging. That's a key aspect. The idea of self-care. I know, Jeff, you mentioned, mental health. It's been given a platform. The youth are speaking up. They're making their stance. They're sharing when they're struggling and what they're struggling with. And as advocates in education, it's of the youth. It's our role. It's our job to protect them and to support them, and to provide them with the resources. So these are things. These are the things that our students deserve. When it comes to justice. What is deserving? And these are all the things that they deserve. And how can we do that in an equitable way?
Mary Rose, thank you. We are coming to the end of our conversation here. So my thanks again to all of you. What a real treat it has been sharing the screen with you and hearing your stories and your contributions. The charism is very much alive and palpable, as it has been in the past 350 years, and no doubt will continue for the next 350 years. Personally, I'd love to be around to see what happens, but but I will try to be here as long as I can, as I think we all hope to see the good hope and opportunities ahead. And I think that's an important note that I'd like to end on, which is one of hope. In a time where there is a great absence of hope among many residents of this area. All I have heard today from the beginning of this conversation to the end is the repeated term hope. And I have no doubt hope will continue as we have these congregations have been through revolution, plague, war, globalization, the new world, everything you can imagine the universe has thrown at them the past 350 years. And yet the work continues in hopeful and meaningful ways. So pandemic or not, I hope there are some good opportunities ahead. It's important that we find them. And with that, I'd like to close on this final question that came in, and I'll go ahead and answer it. The question is, love seeing this family of St. Joseph all together in this one virtual place. My questions are, when is the next gathering? And how will this conversation continue? The answer is very simple. follow all of these organizations and people on social media, and I'm going to name drop 2 organizations. The CSJ Center for Reconciliation and Justice at Loyola Marymount University, the CSJ Institute at Mount St. Mary's University. Sign up for their newsletters, follow them on social media. That's where these conversations will continue, and there will be plenty more of them. So thank you all very much again for your time, your talent, and your continued treasure and work. I'm sure if everyone's microphones are unmuted, you hear a roaring applause. So we'll just do it in our imaginations until we can gather safely and in person. This conversation will continue, and I look forward to continuing it with all of you. Everyone have a wonderful day and enjoy the rest of the symposium.